Bud and I sat side by side in the U.S. Open press room for the better part of 38 years. I sat here, Bud sat here. Every single day, he would come in and he would say, "Who's playing?"
It was clear to me over all those years that I knew you, starting in 1969, that you never took yourself too seriously. That was your finest quality.
But it used to be a lot of laughs in the press rooms, and Bud was always in the middle of it. He was always kind of the ringmaster.
We get sort of locked down in boring, dull questions about forehands and backhands, and Bud would always ask something a little bit off the wall, a little bit different.
Bud was the master of nicknames. My favorite was probably Fräulein Forehand for Steffi Graf. The Basil Dazzle for Roger Federer. That's a fantastic name.
I think one of my favorite all-time Bud lines was the story he wrote about Aaron Krickstein, whose loss to Jimmy Connors was repeatedly a broadcast during rain delays at the U.S. Open, and the opening line was, "Poor Aaron Krickstein," which was a great lead.
There was a Chinese tennis player named Hu Na, and he wrote, "Who's in the second round?" That's correct. Pardon, I said? Who won? Exactly. Who won? Big and unexpectedly. Nah, you got it. Young Na came through in her debut. Who? Absolutely. Hu Na, the greatest player in the history of the People's Republic of China.
Shlomo Glickstein of Israel against Bjorn Borg. And they did a replay, and suddenly you heard Bud say, "Go, go, Shlomo," and fastball.
Bud was my mentor. Bud was my friend. Bud made me laugh.
I miss Bud for a lot of things, for his humor, his candor. He had a way of making everybody calm around him.
If I could say one thing to Bud now, it's that I hope the Taylors are as good in heaven as they were down here.
We missed you terribly. Too bad you're not still with us.
I'll miss you here, Bud, for sure. It's not the same here without you. But it's great that this media center we're in is named after you now, and hopefully your legacy and spirit can be carried on.
Bud, you're missed. Your storytelling is missed. Your humor is missed. But more than anything, your heart's missed.
Thank you for being my mentor. Thank you for being my teacher. Thank you for being my colleague. Most importantly, thank you for being my friend, my lifelong friend. I miss you more than you'll ever know.
Touching words there. John Wertheim, Chanda Rubin, back with us here on TC Live. John, as we remember Bud Collins and the U.S. Open Media Center, dedicated in his honor in 2015, passed away in 2016. What did he mean to our sport, journalism in general?
Just an absolutely towering figure in both senses. And it's funny, I mean, I think there was always this really nice balance with Bud, but even in that tribute, you hear a lot of talk about his nicknames and play on words, and there were reference to his pants. But I think he really balanced style with substance. And this was a rigorous journalist. This was someone who had, he'd covered Vietnam. He'd covered Muhammad Ali. He wrote books. So there was a levity to Bud. He was everybody's friend. That was one of the most appropriate nicknames. His real name was Arthur, but he really, this is the embodiment of Bud. But there also was a real journalist there, and there was real heft. And it wasn't just clever quips and puns and nicknames and pants. That was part of what made him such a delight to be around. But again, I would emphasize the substance that complemented the style.
Yeah, for me, it was always remarkable being around Bud Collins, how much he truly loved the game. And it just came across whenever, he'd speak about a match or some historical fact that only he seemed to be able to remember. I mean, it was incredible what was in that brain of his and how he used it to educate all of us, to make us all feel good about the game, and also to just make it fun, to lighten the mood. He always had a quick comeback. He was never at a loss for words, and it always seemed like the right thing to say whenever he said it. And also for me, I didn't learn this until later, years after meeting him, but he was a player and a coach as well. And, that all of that came through, just how immersed he was in the game.
Yeah, it was incredible as we went back to our signature series a couple weeks ago during our Tennis Channel Live History Week to learn even more about Bud Collins. John, you got to meet Bud. What was that experience like?
Oh, man. But Bud was a dear friend. And I just remember I always tell the story, the very first event that I ever covered. And there was Bud Collins, and I'm in my, mid-20s, and you're in the press room, and this is a towering figure. We'd all seen him on TV, grown up with him. And he came over and basically introduced himself, made no assumption I knew who he was, and said, if you have any questions, I'm your guy. Feel free to ask me anything. So that night I go, I'm watching a match in the bleachers. Chad, I'm sure you remember this was the Manhattan Beach tournament that was played at a Marriott, and I'm sitting way up in the stands. And some of the vendors had free tickets. And these were guys who I think were selling food on the grounds. And after their shift, they went up and watched a little tennis. And they saw Bud courtside, and they said, there he is. There's the guy who taught us the difference between whatever it was, the service line and the baseline. And Bud had clearly befriended these workers at the tournament, these guys who were vendors there, and they too had that kind of connection with Bud. So again, just an absolute gem of a human being. I mean, Nitin Varma did such a terrific job on that documentary and really captured the point that I think Chanda makes as well, that a lot of this was just about fun. And you know what? These are serious athletes. Let's not diminish anything. But at the end of the day, we're traveling the world, and these guys are hitting a yellow ball over a net. So let's not take ourselves too seriously. There was such a nice blend of perspective, but seriousness, again, of sizzle and steak, of style and substance. This was someone who really sort of was highbrow and lowbrow, and you put it all together, and it just formed an absolutely delightful human being.
Yeah, I think, John, to your point, Bud, he had the respect of so many. And that's not easy to do, as a journalist, as a broadcaster, when, you have to try to be honest, but at the same time, try to take into account. I mean, these are humans. These are people who are going to make mistakes, who, aren't going to do everything perfectly. And I think he just always had that balance. You never felt when you talked to Bud that, he was negative about you, that he was down on what you were doing, what you were trying to do, particularly coming off the court after a win or a loss. You just felt like he got it. And if he didn't get it, he wanted to understand. And I think that really was a testament to his character and how he approached the sport as well.
Yeah, and he was a true student of the game. He literally wrote the Bud Collins Encyclopedia of Tennis. And when it comes to tennis history, he will go down as one of the greatest our sport has ever seen. John Chanda, thanks so much. When we come back, we will have the men's final from the U.S. Open 2016. Novak Djokovic taking on Stan Wawrinka. That's next.